It is time to say good afternoon to Amanda Lang, CTV News Chief Financial Correspondent, taking a look at some of the stories in business this week. I guess fair to say this roller coaster slingshot, whatever you want to call it, in the stock market has been pretty phenomenal to watch. Of course, it's been falling and falling. Then all of a sudden, Donald Trump, one day last week, says the U.S. is getting to wrap up operations. We saw the market, I think at one point yesterday, the Dow was up over 1,000 points. And then today, flip-flop the other way, because last night Donald Trump went on national television and said pretty much nothing. But what he did not say was what he'd said the week before about actually bringing this thing to a close. Markets reacted today. We have oil. I guess the price of gas in Canada, I don't know what it is where you are. In Montreal, now some places are over $2 a liter. So I guess it's impossible to try to figure out where this goes. This is going to be the reality, I guess, in markets until this thing is over. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And I mean, I think you're really highlighting a problem for markets, which is in ordinary times, in the before times, if a president said something, you could start to price it in. And now you really can't. You don't know if it's real. You don't know if it's happening. You don't know if he's going to change his mind. And so you definitely saw, it was interesting actually to see the positive reaction in stocks globally to the idea that this might come to an end. And by the way, come to an end unilaterally. Like the U.S. might decide it was going to tools down, but that doesn't mean that the Strait of Hormuz opens, that the hostilities in the region cease, or that kind of normal business, resumes. So even so, with just the idea that the U.S. would stop its end of things, markets did jump. Oil prices came down a little bit. But as you say, we see a reversal of that course, and you get this kind of sense that the uncertainty is really costly here to a lot of people. I have to wonder, because of the times we're living in, whether in these weird swings, people aren't making money. And maybe they know it's not real. I almost hesitate to go there because I'm accusing people of crimes. But you do wonder whether or not there's market manipulation happening here. But for sure, the market is haywire.
It's funny. We were talking about conspiracy theories yesterday about something completely different because of the moon launch. But then, you bring up a really interesting point. I've heard this now being repeated several times. The idea that, if you're tipped off somehow, when Donald Trump says something, those markets swing, and the swings are pretty big, and depending on the direction, there's lots of money that has already been made in betting markets.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely now these new prediction markets where you could play, but for sure, who is buying and selling in the futures market the day before the president muses about ending the conflict, and who makes hundreds of millions of dollars the next day. These are, in some ways, this kind of thing is as old as time. Insiders got tipped off to, Russia defaulting on its debt back in the day. That was the big story. It could still happen. The fact that it can happen like day trading now is a bit unnerving to other market participants. It underscores for me, Aaron, that if the market to you is a place to earn money because one day you want to retire, these day-to-day swings, you have to kind of weather them and look away. And again, think about sort of your own circumstance. Yeah. How old are you? When do you need the money? That will change what you do. But if you don't need it for 10 years, really don't get worked up about what it's doing every day.
Yeah. And by the way, for those people who are also on social media, the thing I'm noticing too is everybody and his brother now is online, whether it's on Instagram or on TikTok, offering advice, and always prefacing that by saying this is not financial advice, and then telling you what they see going up or what they hear or what they expect to happen. So it's even more difficult as an everyday, like as a regular trader, right? Not an investor, to not get caught up in these things.
I think that's right. And there's definitely, you can get the momentum of that trading. We saw that with some of those, the so-called meme stocks. We know it happens, that stocks can move on no actual news at all. So throw that into the mix. And yeah, it's a tough time to be. This is honestly, it's one, but hats off to people who want to manage their own. This to me would be like performing heart surgery on myself. I have a financial advisor. I let them do it because they're not emotional, right? So you give it over to people who actually know what they're doing and why they're doing it.
All right, let me move on to one other story. Big story today. We're starting to hear reaction already. Stellantis, the Canadian automaker, talking about maybe becoming the plant in Canada where Chinese EVs might be made. Now, this is interesting on a couple of levels. Number one, we know, of course, that Mark Carney said we will be bringing cars into China. And I think I remember, from China rather, I remember at the time saying, does this mean they're just shipping cars here? Because that seemed unlikely. These deals don't tend to work that way. Usually that company would say, well, maybe we'll have a parts plant or something here to just show that they're serious about doing stuff in Canada. How different is this in terms of actually assembling cars here?
So it is an interesting story. Stellantis isn't confirming it, but its sources close to, and it's kind of multiple reports. they own this. They own a big stake in this Chinese EV company called Leapmotor, and they have this idled plant in Brampton. And so because there's an opportunity to bring some Chinese EVs here, we all kind of assumed it would be BYD, but Leapmotor is a fast-growing Chinese EV. And yeah, Stellantis could absolutely be trying to figure out how to get in this game and use that plant to do the final assembly. And here's where it gets kind of critical for our auto industry, and where, this might be the wake-up call, is that Chinese EVs do not assemble close to their sales. They ship around the world. They have these so-called kits where it's a quick final put together, but they make everything themselves. They make all of the parts. They make all of the battery. So the idea that we would somehow get a piece of the action the way we have with the big three might actually be a bit of a fairy tale. If we're going to go with the Chinese cars, that they may ship everything here and we'll be able to put them together, that's a lot fewer jobs. So you're already seeing reaction from the Premier and from the union saying, we don't want that. But that might be what we're looking at if we want to invite them here.
Well, isn't that a sort of something better than nothing sort of scenario?
Yeah, you could say that. Now, you can all certainly understand why, from the union's point of view, they're not going to say, hip, hip, hooray right out of the gate. They're going to try to get something more than that. And maybe there's some negotiated, part of it where we could say, look, we want to be in your supply chain, and what are the entry points? That may all be going on behind closed doors. But if we just want Chinese cars on the road, this is kind of what it looks like. So it makes sense that Stellantis would be looking to use this plant in this way. The publicity around this might kill this initial foray because it might be so negative, but I do think it's a sign of the future here. And the question will be, what can we negotiate? What are the jobs? Because these are good jobs, and the whole supply chain of auto parts, of course, we've built up over time. Can we adapt and play a role in the new supply chains? That's what we've been working for, and that's what we have to keep arguing for.
It's funny, you just brought up that other company that I'd never heard of before. As you said, the focus has been on BYD. They're selling cars in other parts of the world, and actually pretty nice cars that get pretty good reviews as well. I wonder if, given this relationship you just mentioned Stellantis has with another Chinese EV manufacturer, maybe there's room here where, multiple manufacturers, because there are multiple manufacturers of these EVs in China, actually kind of compete against each other to see who would come to Canada and offer more.
Yep, totally. And I mean, it's a complicated scenario because multiple manufacturers, but they're all the Chinese government, right? It's all a dictatorship on the other side of this equation. Stellantis made this strategic investment in Leapmotor because it wants to play in that market. It makes sense for them. We're still dealing with one entity, and probably it'll have the same rules for all of these companies in terms of what it will allow and whether we can actually get a piece of the action on their supply chain. So it probably would be government to government no matter what. But I think you're right that it's to our advantage. It's certainly to the consumer's advantage that these are in competition. Interestingly, Leapmotor in China just had massively strong sales, up 30%, and BYDs are kind of stalling out. They're still the most popular car in China, but they've sold so many that they're kind of at a higher point, and their sales are sort of starting to slow down. So it's interesting that Leapmotor is the fast-growing car in China, and, makes sense to look at it to bring it here.
We shall see. All right, Amanda, as always, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Great to talk. Have a good weekend.
Canadian women are looking for more out of themselves, their businesses, their elected leaders, and the world around them.
And that's why we're thrilled to introduce the Honest Talk podcast.
I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark. And in this podcast, we interview Canada's most inspiring women.
Entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, politicians, and newsmakers, all at different stages of their journey.
So if you're looking to connect, then we hope you'll join us.
Listen to the Honest Talk podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcasts.